Okay, let's dive into this. Back in May of 2026, the landscape of Indian state politics experienced an absolute seismic shift. For 15 years, Mamata Banerjee and the Trinamool Congress, the TMC, maintained what honestly felt like an impenetrable fortress in West Bengal. I mean, she was the giant slayer, right? The leader who ended 34 years of left rule back in 2011, survived incredibly intense political battles, and built up this massive welfare state. But in this explainer, we're looking at the anatomy of a historic political shift, because that 15-year reign, it just ended. A party that polled a mere 0.4% in this state back in 1984 actually crossed the majority mark and completely dismantled the TMC's fortress. So how does a deeply entrenched political titan lose her grip? Well, you have to recognize that an election of this magnitude is never lost on just one single issue. It's the result of a perfect storm.
To really deconstruct this perfect storm, we're going to break things down into 4 interconnected themes: the end of an era, scandals and broken trust, the ECI intervention, and finally, shifting demographic votes. Because it's really the combination of all these pillars that rewrote the state's political arithmetic. So let's start with our first theme, the end of an era, overcoming a 15-year wall. Look, in politics, anti-incumbency is practically a mathematical certainty. 15 years of the same administration and the exact same cadre networks naturally built up an undeniable fatigue among voters, making them highly receptive to change. Which brings us right into Section 2, scandals and broken trust, the collapse of core support. Fatigue alone doesn't explain a collapse of this massive scale. For that, we have to look at the profound controversies and governance failures that fundamentally shattered the incumbents' foundational trust, particularly with women and the youth. Perhaps nothing illustrates this broken trust more powerfully than the tragic 2024 RG Kar Medical College case. The horrific rape and murder of a trainee doctor inside a government hospital in Kolkata triggered sustained, nationwide protests, and the emotional impact was profound. The victim's mother, Ratna Debna, actually stepped into the political arena, stating, "I chose to fight in this election for my daughter and for women whose security is under threat under the TMC government. Mamata Banerjee and her corrupt party leaders are responsible for my daughter's death." The public perception of a delayed response, along with allegations of evidence tampering, severely damaged the government's brand equity when it came to their foundational promise of protecting women. Now, what's really interesting about this is how that profound emotional grievance translated into hard data at the ballot box. 93.24%. According to Election Commission of India data, that was the staggering female voter turnout for this election. It's a massive mobilization, and it proves that the grievance surrounding women's safety literally never left the campaign trail. It remained a primary driver for one of the most critical voting blocs in the entire state. And, safety wasn't just a crisis in the city. Out in Sandeshkhali in January 2024, Enforcement Directorate officers were actually attacked while trying to question a TMC district council member, Sheikh Shah Jahan. What followed was a 55-day period where he remained a fugitive, totally evading law enforcement. The situation escalated to the point where the Calcutta High Court had to directly intervene, transferring custody to the CBI, which then led to a massive charge sheet in May 2024, amidst severe allegations of sexual assault and land grabbing. This micro-narrative played on a national loop, shattering the government's image and staying totally fresh in the minds of voters right up to polling day. But while safety dominated the news headlines, economic trust was eroding right at the kitchen table. The Teachers Eligibility Test, or TET, recruitment scam alienated an entire generation of educated youth. According to reports, young people who had spent years preparing for competitive exams watched as jobs were allegedly sold off to syndicates with documented links to the ruling party. As the government fought accountability in the courts, countless Bengali families felt a deep, personal betrayal. They saw it as a stark departure from the welfare state they had supported for a decade and a half. All right, moving to Section 3, the ECI intervention, dismantling the booth machine. Now, historically, independent research from bodies like the Observer Research Foundation and data from the NCRB have documented a high degree of electoral coercion in West Bengal. To counter this, the Election Commission of India stepped in to actively neutralize it. The ECI rolled out some truly sweeping institutional actions. First, the deployment of a staggering 3.5 lakh security personnel to maintain order. Second, for the first time ever in a state election, the National Investigation Agency, or NIA, was deployed. And third, they established new polling booths directly inside high-rise residential complexes. So by doing this unprecedented security deployment effectively stripped the traditional booth machine of its usual power.
And this intervention wasn't just preventative, it was highly reactive. Take the extremely rare repoll ordered in the Falta constituency on May 21st. Now, Falta falls under Diamond Harbour, which is the constituency of Mamata Banerjee's nephew, Abhishek Banerjee. The ECI ordered this complete repoll after black adhesive tape was allegedly found covering the buttons for opposition candidates on the voting machines. It's a pretty stark illustration of the kind of irregularities the ECI was battling. To put that into perspective, the scale of this single intervention was huge. The ECI formally cited that exactly 53,967 voters, which is nearly 23% of Falta's electorate, were directly affected by this subversion of the democratic process. Numbers like that really underscore why the ECI's aggressive, hands-on approach was such a defining factor in 2026. The ripple effect of all this went way beyond just security. It actually enfranchised a historically sidelined demographic. For years, observer reports indicated that high-rise buildings in Kolkata were often locked by party-linked mobs on polling day, keeping the educated middle class away from the ballot box. By putting booths directly inside these residential complexes, Kolkata's disgruntled middle class finally got a chance to vote, and with the raw emotions of the ongoing scandals fresh in their minds, they turned out to express their anger. Let's move to our final theme and see how this all builds up. Section 4, Shifting Demographic Votes, the New Electoral Math. Because even with anti-incumbency and a secure voting process, elections ultimately come down to the math, the fracture of traditional voter blocks. A stark illustration of this ideological pivot is the Matua community. This group of Hindu refugees from Bangladesh represents about 1.7 million crucial votes. For years, the TMC successfully courted them through symbolic gestures and steady welfare delivery. But the opposition offered something incredibly concrete: citizenship, via the Citizenship Amendment Act, rules notified in March 2024. Objectively speaking, for a community whose core identity revolves around displacement and belonging, the promise of concrete, permanent citizenship simply outweighed the promise of continued welfare. Simultaneously, the incumbent's most reliable voting bloc experienced a historic fracture. Leading up to the election, the ECI conducted a special intensive revision of electoral rolls. As you can see from the data, they deleted approximately 90 lakh names. That is about 12% of the electorate. According to election observers, roughly 65% of these undecided deletions were Muslim voters. For a party whose winning arithmetic since 2011 rested on near-total Muslim consolidation, this administrative cleanup shattered their foundational voting base. Finally, compounding these external demographic shifts was a profound internal crisis, captured by the term Pipo Sarkar, or a nephew's government. According to the source analysis, this was the growing perception that the party had transformed from a mass movement into a family enterprise centered around Mamata's nephew, Abhishek Banerjee. This internal dynamic created a massive dynastic liability. It deeply alienated crucial veteran loyalists, most notably Suvendu Adhikari, whose exit signaled a fatal internal fracture. So what does this all mean? The fall of the TMC wasn't just one bad headline. It was a mathematical certainty of 15 years of anti-incumbency colliding with deeply personal scandals. It was an empowered election commission tearing down a historical machinery of coercion, and it was a fundamental shift in demographics where the promise of citizenship and internal dynastic fractures completely rewrote the rules of the game. A perfect storm gathered, and the 15-year fortress fell. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. With the old order totally dismantled, what exactly is the new future of Bengal politics?